Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome to the session on funding for agroecology. My name is Daniel Moss. I'm the director of the Agroecology Fund. I'm joining you from the United States, a beleaguered country right now, hoping for more hope and stability and peace in the coming year, in the year that we've just entered. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. And let me just give you a couple of quick remarks about what we're going to talk about today in this next hour. And we're so glad you're able to join us. Thank you so much. I think you're in for a real treat with a really excellent panel. We're gathered together on this call, on this panel, because we each recognize how important agroecological food systems are in this very uncertain world that we're living in. And we observe at the same time how underserved we are in agroecology and related food systems. Through traditional financing. The public and private financing available, in fact, tends to offer incentives for food systems that are really the polar opposite of agroecology. They tend to reward extractive agricultural practices that despoil land and water. They offer a narrow range of foods that undermine traditional cultures and good nutrition, and they encourage exploitative labor practices and farmer debt through dependency on external inputs. And the public subsidies and research, generally speaking, and extension tend to encourage industrial agriculture at the expense of the kind of sustainability that agroecology and related tech approaches offers. And that really must change. So the purpose of this session is to explore that change. It's really to explore how to reverse this perverse financial flow and how to support agroecology. We'll explore both donor motivations for supporting agroecology, as well as practical approaches to doing so. And to do that, we have a really remarkable panel that I want to introduce you in turn. We're going to get started with our colleague from Uganda, Edie Mukiibi. And Edie Mukiibi is a farmer and founder of a school and community food education initiative that restores young people's connection to sustainable food production. He's a trained and experienced tropical agronomist. He is the coordinator of Slow Food Uganda and he is also Slow Food International's vice president. Eddie serves as an advisor to the Agroecology Fund. Eddie's in the Ugandan countryside with not a terrific connection. So we have here a photo of Eddie, and we'll hear his voice. Thank you so much, Eddie, for sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you, Daniel. Greetings to everyone watching and listening to us. I'm happy to be here on this session. And thanks for the introduction, Daniel.
We're gonna take about 10 minutes each for each speaker. And the dynamic for the session really is to look at three questions that Eddie and the other speakers will look at. And those questions are the following. What are the primary motivations for your organization in supporting agroecology? How do you go about your support? Can you tell us a little bit about your strategy? And then the third point that I touched on, given how perverse incentives are currently tilt the playing field away from agroecology, what are your thoughts about how to scale up this work within your own organization or by working in collaboration with others? So Eddie, feel free to answer any or all of those questions for about 10 minutes time of speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. First of all, the first question is really important, where the Agroecology Fund and all the other organizations which I represent find the motivation to support agroecology. First of all, it's our responsibility as citizens of this planet to support agroecology in any way possible. If it's by funding, if it's by promoting agroecology, if it's by advocating for better policies, I think it's our responsibility as people who are surviving on this planet to support agroecology, and also to support food sovereignty, the sovereignty of the millions of small-scale farmers, the millions of consumers or eaters or people who are connected to food in many different ways, to have the best food production system and consumption system that builds the planet and also makes the future generations survive even when we are not there anymore. Agroecology is also, according to me and also to millions of people out there who agree with this statement, agroecology is the food production and management system of the future. If we really need to manage food in the future, now and in the future, if we need to manage the food production systems in the future, we need to support agroecology. We need to promote agroecology. We need to increase funding for agroecology. This is a very big motivation for us. Once you look at all the destruction that is taking place with the industrial system, all the abuse of human rights in Africa, in Latin America, in other places where land is being grabbed to support industrial agriculture. And if you look at all the deception with the GMOs, with the chemicals, all these things around industrial agriculture, there is no way you can sit back and look at things getting out of hand. So the best thing is to get up, support agroecology, and make sure that the planet survives, that people eat well. And also agroecology is a system of the multitudes. It's a system of the majority of the producers, majority of the consumers. So this is also really, it's also really important to support this system through the different ways which I've mentioned. Moving down to our support strategy, like you said, I will talk so much about the strategy of the Agroecology Fund, the funding consortium, which to which I sit on the advisory board. There are quite a lot of, or I can say there are thousands of organizations working on agroecology, promoting agroecology, and also implementing agroecological principles. And there are millions of actors. And there is limited funding in the agroecological space when you compare the two systems, the agroecological and also the industrial system. The industrial system has few players, but with huge amounts of money. The agroecological system has millions of actors, millions of players. It's the system of the multitudes, but with limited funding. So in this scenario, the strategy is to support collaboratives, bringing people together to put efforts together, to leverage the little resources we have, and to work together and have a much bigger impact, and also like reducing on the many costs which would come up if every organization worked alone, every individual worked alone. So I think it's a very interesting strategy to which the Agroecology Fund is using to support collaboratives, to support actors working together without putting any geographical restrictions or any thematic restrictions, because agroecology is a wide subject and it covers the entire planet. I believe that the joint efforts of these collaboratives, the different organizations which come together to put ideas together, to put resources together, like resources like time, like energy, creativity, they yield more impact than the isolated dots of work which could be implemented everywhere. When we are trying to work against the industrial system, the system of the few powerful, we need to work together because we are many, we are millions. So we need to put this effort together. And also, it's important to note that the Agroecology Fund looks at agroecology as a three-legged stool. This is rooted in the Agroecology Fund strategic plan, which is really, really important to look at agroecology. Agroecology as a three-legged stool. One of the legs of this stool is science, where the fund is supporting more research into the technical aspects of agroecology, generating more knowledge and sharing more knowledge on the indigenous food system, on biodiversity, and all other things which are embedded in agroecology. Another stool is about practice, supporting and promoting activities of peasant farmers who are implementing agroecology, activities of organizations which are actually practically on the ground implementing agroecological principles. Another important aspect here, which is supported by the Agroecology Fund, is movement building. like I said, we are many, we are millions, we are multitudes who are working on the right side of the food system, that is the agroecology and the sustainable food systems. But we need to build a critical mass of people, of actors, of organizations, of the multitudes of players and change makers to bring about a change in the food system. So movement building is something really, really important, and it's one of the the strategic areas of focus which the Agroecology Fund is looking at. Those are some of the strategies of supporting agroecology in the Agroecology Fund. I will briefly look at question number 3 of the playing field. It's true, even here in Uganda, most of the incentives go towards industrial agriculture. When you look at most of the programs which have been brought forward by the governments to support agriculture, most of these programs, they focus on industrial agriculture, leaving few or even much little or much less resources to finance agroecology. And this makes the ground not leveled at all. So it's really important, like what we are doing in Africa here, especially in Uganda. We are trying to look out to organizations which are forming, which are promoting agroecology, to form advocacy groups. For example, one on private and public, to influence public and private funding towards agroecology. Many organizations like Slow Food here in Uganda, like Food Rights Alliance, PELAM, and other organizations we have formed what we call the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group to make sure that the public funds in the national budget are not only allocated to the industrial agricultural systems, but also to sustainable agriculture, most importantly, agroecology. Also leveraging on work, ideas and activities, working on things together. I think it's really important to work in collaborations. It's not very impactful in this field where we are to work in isolation. It's very important to work in collaborations with others to avoid duplication of grants, first of all, because the grants are not that many, the funding is not that many. We are still in the traditional systems of funding. We are mostly relying on philanthropy. So we need not to duplicate this, but also not to duplicate work. So when we work together in collaborations, when we work perfectly together in collaboratives, I think we can work better to create an impact, a much bigger impact across the vertical scale of change in the food system. When I talk about the vertical scale of change in the food system, I mean from the grassroots level to the smallest peasant farmer, being influenced to adopt agroecology, to practice agroecology, but also to huge governments like regional governments or even international organizations which are influencing the food system. So we need to work very well in collaborations across this vertical scale of change, from grassroots actors working hand in hand with global, regional, or national movements or international organizations. This saves resources, time, energy, and brings about motivation among the actors to continue the work we do when we realize that this work is appreciated, and it also reduces on the burden of donors to look through these proposals or ideas which might be isolated and split into small dots everywhere. But when these ideas are put together in collaborations, I think it makes a bigger impact, and also it reduces on the resources which we need to move forward. Thank you, Daniel, for now. I'll be happy to listen to other speakers and maybe add on later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddie. That's terrific. Really appreciate that perspective from Uganda and the global work that you're involved in through the Agroecology Fund. Particularly like that kind of connection that you made with movement building and moving and influencing finance, and the example that you mentioned, from your own country in Uganda, forming a coalition amongst civil society organizations that are seeking to shift public priorities in funding agriculture. Really important work. Folks, before we turn to the next speaker, just want to remind everybody in the audience that we really welcome your questions and comments. So feel free to use the chat function, and after the speakers finish, we'll turn to your questions. So please do let us know what you're thinking. We're going to turn next to Rikke Olivera, a senior global technical specialist in natural resources management with the International Fund for Agriculture Development, IFAD. And Rikke supports national and local governments, NGOs, and rural communities in the design, implementation, and supervision of rural development and natural resource management projects and investment programs. We're really happy to have Rikke joining us from Rome. Thank you, Rikke. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for everybody joining online. Yes, I come from IFAD. For the people who don't know what IFAD is, it's a very small investment fund inside the UN system. So we are based in Rome, like FAO and WFP, which is our sister organization working on agriculture and rural development. So our mandate is very particular. It's on rural poverty. So we work with the smallest of the small-scale producers, and we also work with agricultural workers and the whole population that belongs to the rural poor. The way we work, we look a little bit more like the development banks than the other UN agencies, since we are investing through the government. So we are designing investment projects together with the governments and the rural organizations and the communities, and then we give out highly concessional loans. And for some of the countries who are in that need, we also blend up with grant financing. These investment projects also consist in all the financing sources coming from the governments themselves, or for other development partners who co-invest with us, and even from the beneficiaries, they also put in some funding. So a project in the IFAD sense is a package of different financing sources where IFAD put in our share. So this is just a little bit on who we are. So on agroecology, we're part of the FAO-led upscaling initiative, which is an initiative from multiple agencies within the UN system. And that initiative started in 2018. And the first task we put to all of us was to figure out actually what are we currently doing in agroecology. So we were all encouraged to do a stock take. So that we did last year to figure out what is it we do already, but where is it also that we can do more, and also start to kind of operationalize what does agroecology actually mean within the IFAD investment world. The main findings that we found, and we actually didn't know what to find, was that 13% of our projects are what we are calling fully agroecological based. And then we have another 43% who are like partially. So they're on the way, but they could do better in terms of integrating the different concepts in agroecology or the different elements. And then we have the last 40%, which are not. Among these 40%, we have projects that are supporting fisheries, which they were not really captured in our agroecology framework. So that's actually why they fall out. So when we take out the projects where it's not really relevant at all, we come down to, we have like 23% of our portfolio does not invest in agroecology. So this was the glass more than half full. So we were happy to see that actually. Maybe I should mention the sample that we looked at was all our projects that are supposed to be, or are ending or have ended in 2018, or will be ending before 2023. So this is a 6-year span of projects. We more or less approve for $1 billion per year in IFAD funding. And then, as I said, it leverages all other sources of funding as well, just to have an idea. So what is the motivation that we can see out of this study that we have in IFAD to invest in agroecology practices? So one or two key drivers have been coming from our mainstreaming priorities. So we don't have a policy on agroecology per se, but we do have 4 mainstreaming priorities, which is gender, youth, nutrition, and climate change. And what we can clearly see is that on climate change and nutrition, which is not strange, you really have a high incidence of agroecology projects. So when we look at the projects that are supporting agroecology activities, more than 90% of them are also mainstreaming climate change, and more than 90% is also mainstreaming nutrition. So these two mainstreaming issues have been a huge driver for going into agroecology practices. And of course, it's because when you start to wanting to solve the two main issues there, agroecology just comes up as a key solution. So this was also reassuring to see. So this has been one driver. So even though we don't have a policy, our mainstreaming issues are actually driving us towards these kind of investments. Other driving forces has been, we have a program inside IFAD that is a grant program which is financed by multiple donors for adaptation of smallholders' agriculture to climate change. So that funding is also driving a lot of the agroecology activities we see. But it's a small funding in the overall package of projects. But what we can see is that when we have this funding, it also drives that the other funding sources invest in agroecology. So this is very positive as well. Then I will say, moving into the future, of course, the main motivation for why should IFAD invest more in agroecology is that, of course, when we look at the SDG 2, we are losing grounds, and we all know that we are not meeting the target of zero hunger. So this is a main driver. If we want to meet that target, we really need to keep investing in food systems that provide a lot more availability of affordable food for a lot more people. So this is along the same line that Edie was mentioning. We need these food systems that actually work for the rural poor and other low-income families. So this is another main driver moving into the future. Then it's, as you mentioned, so what is it we're investing in when we're investing in agroecology? The way we work is often through we would have a sum of funding in the projects that would invest in investment plans put together by farmers' organization, producer groups, or it can also be community groups, and then they invest together in improving their farming system and also their commercialization. So a lot of the funding that goes into agroecology is on improving their practices. So in that sense, we are mostly investing in the practice part of agroecology. But we are also investing in movements in the sense that a lot of these farmers' organizations, producer groups, cooperatives, women's organizations, they also are part of the movements pushing agroecology. So this is where we invest, and what we saw from the stock take is that we are actually a lot better at investing in these practices on the farm level with the farmers than in the other, you can say, fears where we need to invest in agroecology. One being the market fears. How do we innovate more in these ways of connecting consumers and producers? So we get a lot more direct link and a lot more value also to the farms throughout these short value chains. There we can do a lot more, but we do have very interesting examples in the portfolio starting to do these things. But we want to learn more. We want to learn with partners. And one of them is actually also Slow Food, on how we improve this thing with linking also to markets that can improve the availability of affordable food for a bigger number of people using these diversified agroecology systems. So this is an area where we are slowly starting, but we really need to step up more. And the same thing, we do have some projects that are looking at the more overall level where we also need to invest if we want to drive forward the agroecology. And that is the enabling services and activity and policies, and more the enabling environment. We have a few projects that invest through building like territorial platforms with different stakeholders. And what we do in these projects is ensure that the small producers that we support through their investment plans are also represented in these platforms. And then you simply start to work together amongst all the people producing in the same territories on trying to solve some of the more systemic issues that you can't do at the investment plan level in each organization. So we try to move up the levels for solving how do we get access to market for agroecology products, which can't maybe always comply with very tough sanitation measures or things that kind of excludes the small-scale producers from participating. So the mixture between how do we improve the capacities of the small-scale producer to actually comply, but also on the other side, how do we make the system adapt also to the small-scale producers so we can get this local regional markets functioning with a lot more diversity of fresh food. So this is one of the issues they can solve at these more territorial platforms. But we need to do more in that level, and I think we have a lot to drive from, because we do invest in all these organizations, and we're also trying to now invest more through networks of organizations, still through their production, but how do they work better together to solve these issues at the accessing to market in a more innovative way, and also the more systemic issues, and having a voice on how the territories and the policies are coming down to support them in their work. One of the policies that we have had great success in trying to connect the small-scale producers are these public procurement policies, where you provide food produced by small-scale producers into the public procurement programs for school feeding, for hospitals, and for the military or other public institutions. There's good lessons learned there, but this is definitely where we can see that we could step up more. So then, yeah, ending on the note of how do we want to scale this? How would we want to move it forward inside IFAD? So we don't have a strategy per se for agroecology, but we do a lot, as I was just mentioning. But what we do have in making is our new biodiversity strategy, which is actually very positive, because I do think, just like these mainstreaming issues I was mentioning, that our biodiversity strategy will also be driving quite a lot of push for the agroecology types of practices and approaches. And the whole issue around, as I was mentioning before, how does IFAD want to support sustainable food system, that will also drive the agroecology agenda. So in that sense, I think there are drivers we can build on. Then, of course, on the more nitty-gritty work, we want to, right now what we are doing is, in top of the stock take, we are then pulling out like 6 or 8 of these highly agroecology-based projects we have, and we are trying to pull out the lessons learned. And this is, of course, just to have the tools inside the organization, but we can also share what is actually success factors and how do you put together an agroecology project investment design. So this is the other thing we are working on, to be able to push it forward inside the organization. What we want also to do, and there we still, yes, we still have something to learn. What we can see is in these financing packages of our project is that we actually managed to leverage very little private sector financing into agroecology. But we do know, like the Agroecology Fund that also has private sector financing behind, that there are more and more, also in the private sector, interested in investing in these types of projects, but also from a social perspective, working with small-scale producers. So this is a little bit our dream, our goal, and where we want to seek partnerships. How can we leverage more of that type of financing in our projects? I mean, as IFAD, we should be able to identify the good business cases, but that should, of course, be done together. But where we can also look at the broader benefits in top of course, a sound rate of return, but we also need to look about these broader benefits that agroecology gives us. And then in terms of when we look at in a broader perspective, and especially also the resilience and food security and the nutrition agenda, that these projects drive some public goods that in the end will be the win-win for all of us. And that will also be for businesses, because again, we do need to look at what does a sustainable business actually look like in the future. So I think this is one of the areas where we really want to seek more partnerships and want to learn how do we do that. And we are very encouraged by the work that is going on among some of these more impact investors on the true cost analysis, trying to figure out what is a sound investment in sustainable food systems. So we want to build on that and see how that can help us drive the agroecology agenda, also for IFAD, but most of all for the smaller producers, organizations, and farmers that we try to support and their communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rikke. That was so rich, and the current work that you're undertaking is so broad and multifaceted, and we really appreciate the transparency in you know, sharing with us what you've learned about your work through this stock taking exercise. I think we all have a lot to learn about that. I really appreciate it. The look at, you know, how it intersects with so many other the key areas of IFAD and all of us that are you know, care about just and equitable development, the connections to nutrition, to climate change, to biodiversity, and the kind of ways that you're exploring this important issue about how to blend these various sources of finance that are so critical for the flourishing of agroecology. So thank you so much. We're now going to turn to our third speaker, Sam Roddick. So Sam Roddick is a trustee of the Roddick Foundation, an activist-based foundation which supports independent and progressive activists and organizations dedicated to a just and kind world. It's with that kind of intention that she became a lead founder in the Farming the Future initiative. And Sam is likewise an entrepreneur and has worked closely with Indigenous peoples in the Amazon for many, many years. So Sam, we're really delighted to have you here speaking with us. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is really exciting. Just want to apologize. I don't know whether or not my internet has been really shaky. So I just want to, I'm not sure like whether it's going to cut out or not. So I suppose my family, it's a family foundation, the Roddick Foundation, and it is birthed from my parents. And as a family, we're very uneasy philanthropists. And we came to philanthropy, and we from my parents' business really booming in the 90s, and their business was the Body Shop, which is one of the first kind of blueprints of ethical business out there, that basically really inspired a whole wealth of socially and environmentally responsible businesses. And it was a food-based business because it was a cosmetic business. And they really believed that actually their business could be a vehicle for social and environmental good. In fact, they believed that was its primary purpose, to contribute to society. And they don't even, our family don't identify ourselves as entrepreneurs or successful business people. We fundamentally, primarily associate ourselves with being activists. And everything that my family taught me for generations, not just my mum and dad, was actually that we are in service to the greater good. And I think it's with that they really utilize the mechanisms of economics in order to continually create this sense of give back. And the models that they created was very fundamental within that. So, for instance, they set up and helped fund cooperative community-driven businesses all over the world, whether it was in Ghana with shea butter, or whether it was Brazil with the kaipo, with Brazil nuts. And they really believed that the very model of their business was the key to actually being creating this kind of global change that needed to be actualized. So their business grew so big that fundamentally the mechanisms of growth then started to restrict their radical kind of courage. And that's when they sold out their company, and my mum put all of her money into our family foundation. And unfortunately, she didn't get to spend it down, which was her ambition. I'm saying that because I personally find the funding philanthropic world very uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because I find it quite dysfunctional, and also built on a very old development model. And within it, sometimes I'm really deeply holding this inquiry: is philanthropy actually preventing the global change that we need today? And so with that idea, the foundation that I'm very much proud to be a part of is constantly looking at how do we represent the root of our activism in the most courageous way, and how do we strategize in the way that we basically give back or invest in change that really represents honoring the phenomenal activists that are on the ground, that are holding the relationship to this transformation. And agroecology, or whatever name you want to call it, it's actually a value-driven food system, one that holds relationship. And we really believe that solutions come and go, and we need to adapt continuously as the world changes and different crises appear. But actually, it's relationships that really hold the key. It's holding relationships with the values that really pretty much are unchanging, that are key. And agroecology, or a value-driven food system, is essentially representing the gateway into many, many, many different issues, whether it's land access, whether it is like a fair food system that everyone has the right to access, whether it's to do with the relationship with the environment, about tending not only our bodies and nurturing our bodies, but actually understanding the source of where our food comes from and nature's intelligence wrapped within it. So I've really, agroecology currently, if we kind of say that name potentially might change and shift according to who's co-opting the language, the values stay the same, and the people who represent them literally are continuous and are consistent. And really, for me, is about identifying those activists and those who are holding those courageous conversations, both within the UK, because this fund, Farming the Future, is a fund that is focused on building the movement, the agroecological movement within the UK, but also further afield, where we really still hold strong relationships to the indigenous movement of resistance and resilience in Brazil. And because fundamentally, like, the indigenous communities that we have come across really hold the true relationship, or a relationship that is that we can all learn from and be inspired to understand how to reconnect ourselves with the culture of food, because food isn't an object, it isn't a product, it is actually a culture, and we have forgotten our culture, we've objectified our culture. So that is the motivation. And within our activist driven kind of philanthropy, the question is, how do you fund the ecosystem of a movement? And that is really, really key. And what we're doing at Farming the Future is coming out of that inquiry. How do we best serve the entire ecosystem and all of the players who hold a fundamental part within the transformation of change? And so we have been experimenting with new ways of funding ecosystems of great participants, as Edie was so eloquently talking about, this need not only to put more investment and leverage more money into agroecology, but also actually to fund connectivity, connecting people together, so they have the funding to be able to take the time to do the thinking, to do the collaborative work, to do the cooperative open source knowledge sharing, and really help kind of provide this kind of support, so those who are doing this important work their jobs are made easier and not harder. Easier in the fact that they are being held within this space. So Farming the Future was born out of Brexit, in the sense of like wanting to seize the opportunity of and claim the space in order to ensure that the values that we represent, which is about the key values of generosity, sharing, caring and tending, not only to our communities, but also equality, justice, and also and collaboration, and also and in this cooperative manner. So Brexit, for how painful it has been, provided that need to stand up and fight for that space and ensure that actually the actors within the UK were really being amplified. And so we put together this fund, and it started off with the Roddick Foundation and the A-Team Foundation that was specifically funding collaborative work. So we funded, it was a small fund of 200,000, and we basically made a call and we did a convening of many of the people who are a part of this conference today, in the sense of asking them to propose collaborative work that amplified and strengthened not only the movement as a whole, the UK movement as a whole, but also their work that they are already digging into. So we did that, and then last year we invited more funders to the table, and we've really worked with the processes of what does good collaboration look like, what does it mean, and what issues that are emerging really need to be championed. The social outcomes, the policy, the policies, the writing of the policies of writing agroecology into our new agricultural bills that actually were about social outcomes, giving access to those who do not have access to nutritious and healthy food, to land access, to gender issues, to representation issues, to migrant workers' rights, to the environmental issues. And there's something very key for me in around agroecology, which is it is a gateway for those who are overwhelmed with climate change, and understanding how to land that into our daily lives is really that we all hold this deep historical relationship to food that goes back generations. It is a uniting kind of ancestral kind of DNA memory that allows people to really understand that actually, their fundamental broken relationship with the environment, I feel like that is the conduit that can help us reconnect. So let me just go back, sorry. So how do we go about the strategy? So the strategy is immersive and emergent, is about really funders working directly in collaboration with the key activists on the ground to collectively pull their intelligence together in order to kind of not conglomerate as one singular goal, but actually create a mycelium in terms of the connectivity between our overarching purpose of change. So the goal, the strategy is to inspire funders to get involved into this sector, to understand that this sector isn't a singular issue, that it touches on all issues of diversity and human concerns. And for me, I think in terms of working on a national level, can we create a funding model that then we can export to other countries, that then we can help create a more reinforced version of what we're all working towards? Have I been efficient? I don't know if that's enough. I think I'm going to end there. Can anybody hear me? Okay, hold on. I'm making myself laugh.
Okay. I don't know if were you, that was wonderful. Do you have any concluding, is that good?
I can hear you now, I think.
Okay, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Well, Sam, I really appreciate the kind of personal narration of your family's values and history, and that kind of the real values-driven commitment to the public good. I'm sorry if I offended you in any way with calling you an entrepreneur, but that was there's a lot of definitions of entrepreneurship, and I hope that we all consider entrepreneurs people that are giving back and thinking about the social good, although there's some work to do in that realm. I think you really brought out some really provocative challenges to philanthropy, calling out some of the dysfunction and some of the kind of perversions of power relations. So I think that's something that we really need to deal with. And I really admire the way that Farming the Future has faced that head on, similarly to what we do in the Agroecology Fund, trying to kind of decentralize and devolve authority to fantastic activist farmers like Edie, Edie and other colleagues that are guiding our grant-making decisions in the Agroecology Fund. So we have a lot in common, and look forward to further collaboration. And I think that your final thought about just really what really needs to happen amongst all this is this kind of values-driven connectivity. I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, it's these relationships that are really going to sustain us. And I love that the metaphor of mycelium. So let us sprout and grow and connect with one another on top of the earth and below the earth. So we have a little over 10 minutes left in our session, and we've received a number of very good questions. And let's see if we're going to have time. We'll try to, let me just quickly summarize what they are. Let's put us all, thank you for putting us back on gallery. I'll say a word about what these questions are. Some of them are directed to individuals on our panel. Some of them could be for anybody. But I also wanted to offer space in the event that any of the panelists had questions or comments for one another. Feel free to jump in and comment or observe. But let me just run through quickly what we've heard from people in the audience. From Frank, we had a question for Edie about in what parts of agroecological food systems would investments be most effective. From Paul, there was a question for Edie as well. With the new organic agroecology law in Uganda, what are the most important efforts now for financing to focus on? From Vincent to Rikke, could you explain to us how IFAD chooses the projects to be funded? Question for Daniel, which I think I'm going to turn over to Sam, if I may, is who are the key funders investing in agroecology in Europe, in particular the UK? And Sam mentioned some of those organizations. A question to Rikke from Frank. Since small and medium enterprises play a major role in agroecological food systems, how can organizations like IFAD invest in incubation and scaling up? There's quite a few, so I'm sorry that I'll just run through these, and then we won't have time to touch on them all, but I'm very glad that we can share these questions and observations from all. A question or observation from Les. Expanding agroecology's benefits depends on linking diverse social movements. How do we do that better, especially between producers and consumers? And to Sam, could you explain to us how you choose the projects to be funded? How are you sure that the money goes to the people that most need it? And let's see, I think that might be it. So that's quite a bit. So let's just turn back to our panelists again and give them a moment to answer the questions that correspond to them, or again, to issue any other kind of observations or questions that they might have for other reflections or thoughts for the other panelists. So Edie, if you can hear us, please do jump in.
Yeah.
Just to about 2 minutes each, since time is short. Thank you.
Thank you to all those who have asked questions, and thank you, Daniel. I'll be very brief to the point to the questions. I'll start with Frank. Frank's question, I think ecological, investing more in supporting farmers with ecological inputs, especially here in the tropics, inputs on soil management, and plant protection, but also it's really important to invest in post-harvest activities and marketing infrastructures. It's really important to think about marketing infrastructures and market development. Then to Paul, it would be absolutely relevant to work with civil society. Paul mentioned some of the potential or some of the examples of the donors like IFAD or funding governments like Denmark. For me, I think it's really relevant to work with the civil society organizations in the agroecology movement to identify key, practical key areas where support is really needed by the grassroots players or farmers, especially shortening the value chain through developing local pro-producer marketing systems, and also working more on research to build more on the science of agroecology, and also sharing more knowledge and building on the knowledge base of the people who are acting in, or who are working in the agroecology sector. Yeah, briefly, that is my response to the questions.
Great.
Thank you, Danny.
And we'll circle back after these comments, Edie, Rikke, and Sam, for your final comments. So if you don't get your last words in, you'll have one more opportunity. Rikke, there are a couple of questions directed your way.
Yes, so let me take it on from Vincent. Thank you very much. So how do we choose projects? Overall, IFAD, because we are an investment fund, investing through the governments with most of the funding going out as loans, there is a distribution formula inside IFAD that actually distributes in each financing cycle, distributes the funding on the countries as an allocation, and then we work from there. And that's, of course, based on the number of rural poor, the vulnerability, the fragility, and all these kind of things that can help us targeting the funding to the poorest in rural areas. And how do we then make sure that the funding goes to the poor and the projects are chosen based on their impacts on rural poverty? So when we design a project, and I've actually just had the really privilege that we are designing a project as a poor agroecology. It was asked by the government to design an agroecology project from Argentina.
Yeah.
So what we do in the design process is talking to all the different farmers organizations, indigenous people organizations, and learning from them what is it that a project like ours could do. So I think our design process are really trying to reach out beyond just discussions, of course, with the governments who are the owners of the projects, but finding out together what are these barriers and what are the best ways of supporting. So in that sense, this is how we do it. And then doing implementation, IFAD has quite tough targeting strategies because of the poverty mandate, and that is supervised twice a year actually by IFAD if we are also reaching the people we are supposed to reach. And that's, of course, a collaboration with the governments, but also all the beneficiaries and their organizations themselves that we would visit during normal times where we can go to the field, but now we're trying to do our best online to reach out. There was then another question on the SMEs. Yes, we are supporting SMEs in the sense that the way we work, as I said before, we work a lot through producer groups, cooperatives. A lot of times you will start out with sort of producer groups and then they turn into cooperatives as the investment plans are built and we start to invest. And this is one type of, I see it as rural SMEs. And in IFAD, we actually call these farmers cooperatives also, they are businesses. And that's the whole aim. How do we make a sustainable economy around the production systems they have? And also all these different types of activities, improving their linkage to markets and the value they get and can invest back in the farms. So these are SMEs where they actually aggregate their projects, but also their products and also commercialize. And even sometimes there's a lot of value adding also in these cooperatives. So this is one type of SMEs. But then, because of our focus also on youth and on women and on the landless rural poor, a lot of these types of groups, they don't have access to land. And they actually sometimes falls out of these investment plans and cooperatives. That's what we've seen, and we are very keen on how we target the other groups. So there we would have these kind of facilities that looks a lot more like incubators. So if you look at agroecology, there's a lot of activities, as Edie also mentioned, the input supply. There's a lot of interesting business opportunities there around how do we apply a lot more the ICT technologies, but in a way that it benefits agroecology, right? So there's also a lot of youth interested in how do we actually move agroecology forward, also on all these kinds of innovations that can benefit the way we design, or the producers have the opportunity to design the farming system. So there are incubators in our project. We have more and more these type of facilities that are then incubating SMEs coming out of it. And these are normally very exciting part of the projects to see what comes out, and a lot of innovation can take place. I think that was, yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Let's turn to Sam.
How do we, well, we're really funding an ecosystem. So there's like 60 organizations who are part of Farming the Future. And they, each program or project, we really facilitate the process of really discussing what are the emerging issues and themes that really are kind of arising for this year of funding moving forward. And we've only been around for 2 years, so we're still experimenting, emerging and adapting our process, because we're not set in our processes, because we want to shift them according to learning how to work together in this collective sense. So each program or each proposal is really more, 3 or more organizations proposing together. They're utilizing each other's resources and skills and also expertise to basically come together and form something in an opportunity they wouldn't have to do before. And our decision-making process is we're leaning into a lot of the experts on the field, key activists who are known, well respected, as well as really identifying what are the issues that are underfunded, where are the emerging voices, and what players within the ecosystem of the UK movement really are key organizations that are under-recognized and under-resourced, that we can help partnership up to build them up in order that we balance our own ecosystem of this movement in a way where it's not like one great effective organization that manages to capture all the funding, while others who are championing issues like around land access, that is a huge problem within the UK, and about who has the right to that access, and actually who has the right to really kind of amplified food culture based on the origins of where they were born, or who the minority of what they represent within the UK. So it's really understanding how the balance of that as well, not just going to the trends, but really going behind the scenes and doing that kind of analysis, because the reality is the silo funding is dysfunctional. And actually within it, when you have really effective, brilliant organizations, and they're really quite conglomerate and big, they don't hold the courage that these activist grassroots organizations do hold. And then of course that we have all of the brilliant farmers out there and the practitioners who don't hold the skills that actually requires them to be able to capture the funding. So it's like we're working constantly with these and assisting all the way through that process, hand by hand. And through that process, we're learning. So the people who are making those decisions are quite immersed in that knowledge sharing, and the success of that. Sorry, that's it.
No, finish up.
I'm finding it. I love it.
Yeah,
that's my last statement.
Well, they're knocking on our door here to wrap up, and just to say, yeah, I think I noticed throughout the program of this excellent conference, and just take a moment to say thank you so much to the organizers of the Real Farming Conference. It's really excellent. But there's quite a few sessions that focus on finance. There's one that's a very provocative session about philanthropy. This whole question about what financing is available, how to democratize financing, how to make sure it's available, how to make sure that the financial streams are transparent with the people that should have access to them. There's work for all of us here in moving money into agroecology. So I just want to thank everybody for their attention, their interest, their participation beyond this conversation, and please continue in these next dialogues that we're having over the coming days about this important issue. Thank you so much to Rikke. Thank you so much to Sam. Thank you so much to Edie. and again to the Oxford organizers. Take care. Good night.